Zapraszamy na scenę pana Dario Soto Abril, dyrektora generalnego Fairtrade International. Please welcome Dario Soto Abril, CEO, Fairtrade International, with a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you very much, and for the undeserved applause because I haven't said anything. So, but thank you very much again. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. Quite an honor. Also, because I'm the one speaking first, so I hope you bear with me. I'm going to share with you a little bit about what Fairtrade is, what we're doing, and what we're planning to do in the future. So, before I start, I want to maybe with a show of hands. But not you guys from Fairtrade. Who can tell me if you have ever heard about Fairtrade, what Fairtrade is, or you have any knowledge about Fairtrade? Fantastic. And who has here, who can show me with hands if you recently buy any Fairtrade product? Great. What product have you bought from Fairtrade? Coffee. Great. You're Dutch. Good. Good. So thank you very much. And what a nice thing that you said it's coffee, because by the way, I'll start by saying that I'm Dario Soto. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Fairtrade International, but more importantly, I'm from Colombia, South America. So I'm not only the CEO for Fairtrade, but also I'm coming from a producer country, which our biggest product is coffee and bananas, which are also Fairtrade products. So I'll start by telling you a little bit about Fairtrade. I don't know if I move this or someone moves it for me, or oh, perfect. So let's start by sharing with you, and this is what you will find on our website, so quite standard. Our mission really is to, our vision, the way we see the world going is a world in which producers enjoy the benefits of fair trade, and they're really empowered and they have sustainable livelihoods. And the mission, you know, we talk about empowerment, three very powerful words. Empowerment, because we seek to empower producers. Promoting, because we really look for to promote fair trading conditions, so we want to change the terms of trade in the world. And the other one is connecting. We want to really connect what producers do, what our farmers, the workers in the producing countries, and the consumers and the big traders. So it's about connecting. But if you don't remember anything of what is there, I want you to remember that Fairtrade, we're here to change life. So our real mission in life, or purpose, is really to make sure that the life of farmers and workers are changed through trade, so they have better lives through trade. We're not a regular non-profit. We're a profit that uses trade to change the world, and that makes us quite interesting. What is Fairtrade? First of all, we are a non-for-profit. We are based in Bonn, Germany, but we have presence in many countries. And we're considered what we name ourselves a multi-stakeholder organization. Why? Because the beauty of Fairtrade is that we're 50% owned by the producers for whom we work, and the other 50% is owned by the movements, the National Fairtrade Organization. So we have a presence both in the north, where we have, when we trade or commercialize our products, but also very important, we have a strong presence in what we call the global south, which is Africa, Latin America, Asia. And the producers, the farmers, the workers are really the owners of Fairtrade. They're the ones who push for the changes and that we're trying to accomplish. We do work as a certifier, or part of our work is the certification of the products. That's maybe what you know when you go and buy a banana or a coffee, you see the Fairtrade logo. And the product for certification goes through producers. We also work with the exporters or the importers, depending on how the products are sent out from the countries, and with the manufacturers. And we certify to them the condition of compliance of certain standards, which I'll let you know which ones are next. So which are our tenets or our principles? Again, I'm not going to read what is there. You can read it. But I think that for me, if you ask me, the biggest principle in which upon which we are based is empowerment. So I keep repeating this word empowerment, and it's not an empty word. What do we mean by empowerment really is that producers not only own fair trade, but also all the standards or the actions that we do, we carry are based on the interests of producers, and are discussed and decided by the producers themselves. So this is what makes Fairtrade different from an organization that is purely based in the north, or that's just certification in a vacuum, because we actually are driven by what the producers ask and expect us to do. So we're very, very committed to this empowerment. Of course, we have also part of the empowerment is good governance, which we work with the producers so that all the governance activities that we do, the producers' cooperatives, producers' organizations are also well governed. You know, so we are based through democratic processes. Producers elect their representatives, and again, everything we do, our standards are also consulted and based on a democratic process. So good governance is very important. And finally, accountability. I mean, we know that we are accountable as an organization both to the consumers, you guys who buy the coffee, the bananas here. We need to show you that we actually, when you buy these products, you're actually with us changing the world. So you're not just buying a banana or a coffee. But also we're accountable to our commercial partners, the big companies that work with us and they trust that we are actually changing the world. And we're also accountable to the producers and the farmers, because they also expect that once we sell the banana or the coffee that you drank in the Netherlands, they're actually, that product is going to get back to them. So the product, the profit is going to get back to them. So that's part of our beauty, no? That accountability, and we're accountable throughout the process. So I mentioned before that, you know, we're a certification, or a core of what we do is certifying, and the certification comes from what we call the standards. And these standards are based on what we expect both our producers and also our partners to comply, to be able to be fair trade. So when you buy, again, a banana or the coffee, you know that this coffee is special compared to the non-fair trade coffee. So what kind of standards make us unique? Well, first of all, we have what we call a minimum price, which is a floor price that protects producers from variations in the global price of products. No? So we also have a premium, which is a surcharge that is paid that producers receive, and those producers invested in community projects. For example, they build hospitals, they build schools, they also work on productivity, and the beauty, again, going back to empowerment, is that the producers themselves, the farmers, the workers, decide how to invest that premium. So this is not like a 4-8. This is actually producers deciding, okay, the best for my community is using the money for this particular case. As I mentioned before, democratic decision-making is a tenet of what fair trade does. Everything by producers, for producers, and producers decide. So it's them democratically deciding how to invest their money. Long-term contracts. We have also very strong standards on climate. And we also have work in other topics of organizational development and the like. A little bit of history about fair trade, which, because the title of the conference is a history and current trends. Fair trade started after the Second World War, around 1949, which was a global movement that started in churches, in which people started to realize, okay, how can we make sure that those who are buying the products, the banana, the coffee, the cocoa, but also crafts that are coming from the South, how can we make sure that people really who are the ones producing these products or making them are actually getting the money that we're paying for it? Where is that money staying? And how can we make sure that this money is well used by them? So that started a movement in the 50s and 60s that wanted to make sure that there was a clear connection with the producers, that the price that was being paid was fair, that the negotiation or the terms in which these international products are bought in the international market is fair, and that's the way fair trade started. Big jump to 1988. In that time, we started formally fair trading with coffee in Mexico, in which there was the idea with the Netherlands also, how do you better connect coffee and the coffee growers with the consumers in the global north, so in Europe, and also, again, make sure that the coffee growers were getting the best deal out of the coffee that they were producing. So that jump started the process of creating the first fair trade in Europe formally, which was called Max Havelaar it's called Max Havelaar Netherlands, and it's still there. Then jump to 1997 when different fair trade organizations that had been created in different countries came together and said, okay, let's create a global movement, and let's make it formal. And that's where Fairtrade International was effectively created. Won't bother you with all these details, but I think that the most recent important thing in our timeline is 2012, when finally a constitution, what we call a constitution, our charter the new charter was passed, and that made it beautiful because formally in the charter it is included that producers actually own 50% of the trade movement. So that makes that charter very special, and again, compared to other entities that also work in aid and trade and commodities, that's what really makes us unique. And we actually are accountable both to you, the consumers, but also our farmers. So 2012. This is just a picture of how the democracy works at Fairtrade. So all the standards and all the decisions are made by the producers themselves. They are organizing cooperatives. And the cooperatives are themselves, they also have the producer networks, which represent them globally. So in terms of Fairtrade scope, where we are, I think it's safe to say that we're almost everywhere. And where we are, we're probably going to get there soon. And you'll see the blue part is where we are in terms of where our products are being purchased or commercialized. And that's done through our national fair trade organizations. We have 19 fair trade organizations, and we also have 8 fair trade marketing organizations. And those commercialize our products in more than 35 countries. We have product itself available 125, more than 100 products. And also connect that with the fact that we have producers. The products that you're drinking, I've said Colombian, but actually have products from more than 73 countries. So again, that's the way we're changing trade. And these products come to us via the 3 large producer networks that we have, again, from Africa, Latin America, Caribbean, Asia Pacific. So this is the scope of fair trade. Basically, the map says it all, but we are everywhere. But most importantly, that geography, we're people, and this is the people for whom we work. So first, we work with more than 1.6 farmers and workers globally. They're owners of our system. These guys are organizing more than, well, I said the number, 1,411 producer organizations. These are cooperatives that they're run by the farmers and the workers themselves. And we are spread out across 73 countries where these producers are. They get annually an estimated around 150 million euros in premium. The premium, again, is the part of the products that they get for community projects. So the hospitals, the education, the schools, and also productivity projects. So that's, again, this is very important because this is what makes us different from other organizations. In terms of retail, we'll see the growth of fair trade is also in terms of sales. And again, because remember, all we do, we're trying to change the terms of trade globally. So we need to sell our products, and we need more consumers like you, so that more farmers and workers enjoy the benefits of fair trade. So you'll see that our products have grown exponentially since the last 10 years or more. In 2004, our global sales were less than 1 billion euros a year, and now we have almost from last year 8 million euros globally in products and sales of fair trade products. So that's quite, for us, an accomplishment. Again, not because of the size of the sales, but because this money really is going into the farmers and workers. This is also very telling for us, is the power of the consumer. Again, we would not do anything without the farmers and the workers, but we could not do anything either without the consumer, who is actually committed, like yourself, who buys the coffee in the Netherlands. Our most recent global study says that 8 out of 10 consumers, at least in Europe, they are aware of fair trade. In the UK, for example, the number is much higher. It's 9 out of 10 consumers, they know about fair trade. And that's the idea. Again, not for the sake of knowing, but because the more people know about fair trade, the more they're conscious created about the importance of working for the farmers and the worker. We have a strong presence here in Poland, and I don't know who's from our Polish team here. Do you want to, in 1 minute, share something about what we're doing? I'm not supposed to give you the mic, but just go for it.
Dzień dobry, bardzo mi miło Państwa przywitać.
Good afternoon. Glad to welcome you. I represent foundation working for fair trade in Poland. We are glad to see you here, and we are trying to work both with business and NGOs, consumers, to build a fair trade market in our country. And I think that an opportunity like this serves this purpose very well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, because I know we don't have a lot of time, but I will share with you that, so the hope of this presentation was to talk about the history, also where we are, the scope of fair trade now, but it's also where we're going in the future. And this is quite interesting. This is also with BSR and Global Scan, we ask companies which their interests were right now in these elements. And at the top of the companies or the business people mind is right now human rights, it's climate change. So those are topics where fair trade is really strong right now. We're doing a huge effort in terms of, first, being compatible and being one of the key partners of the United Nations in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And that's also what the companies are really invested right now. How can we also be a motor of change? Human rights is part of our agenda. Fair trade is working on issues related to gender, child labor protection and avoidance of exploitation, and human rights in general. So that's also where we are very, very aligned with not only what our farmers are asking us, but also what the companies are more and more expecting fair trade to do. And also going forward, as I mentioned to you, that we are, part of our work is certification, so we have the standards. But we're also working more and more with our commercial partners, with the companies, to find more innovative ways to engage them and to work with the producers, because the world is changing. So the world is not the same what was 20 years ago when we could get just by having the standards and we're working with certification. So for example, more and more companies are asking us, okay, but how can we make sure that all this money that the farmers get in the premium is really invested well, and how can we say how much went to the school, how much went to the hospital? So we're coming with new ideas in terms of supply chain mapping and premium tracing. Also, many of you, if you're curious, when you go and buy the banana and the coffee, you might not want to take my word that, oh, this is coming from Colombia. Maybe you want to see, okay, but which community in Colombia is the coffee coming from? What kind of people do live there? What is the profile of the farmer? So increasingly, we're working to have this kind of information available for you, the consumers, and of course for our commercial partners. So introducing more technology in the chain, because again, we know the world is changing. We're also engaging more and more in the larger dialogues about issues that are in the global agenda. So right now, you probably know there's climate change is a big concern. In Germany, they're having the COP23 discussion right now, and fair trade is also working very hard to engage in these conversations. And again, to give you an example of why, this is not just for marketing purposes, but talking about coffee, my beloved coffee, if the trend continues as it goes and none of us do anything, it's estimated that because of climate change, at least 50% of the coffee growing area in the world is going to be gone by 2050. That means that, and at the same time, so that's going down, but at the same time, we as a humanity, we keep growing. So I think by 2050, we're going to be 10 billion humans in Earth. So we're going to have more consumers demanding more coffee, but then you're going to have less coffee growing area and less coffee available, and that's because of climate change. So we know we need to start having these conversations, and we're working hard to do that. So that's where we're going with fair trade. I think to me, key takeaways, if you don't remember anything that I just mentioned to you, remember that first, fair trade is owned by the producers. So when you buy a fair trade product, you're really buying a connection with the actual producers. We're actually working with the producers to decide what is best for them. And we're actually having this strong connection with the companies. And I will leave you with a small story, which is talk a lot about coffee, but actually I'm not from the coffee growing region in Colombia. Actually more from the banana region because I'm from the coast. And my first week in Fairtrade earlier this year, I went to a conference in Berlin, and I met, in all the places Berlin, a Fairtrade banana producer, Poncho Banana, they call him. And I told Poncho, hey, I'm new here. Tell me a little bit how does this work? Do we really do anything for you, or is this just? And he said, you know what? There are a lot of conferences and things like that, but Fairtrade for me as a banana producers have been a real changer in my community, because the premium that we got from the sales of banana in Europe, we are now being able to, we're creating more employment. So the kids who in the past will become members of the paramilitary gangs or girls going into prostitution, we're actually now being able to provide them education and schooling. And that he also told me, we're right now in Colombia going through the peace process. And he said, without knowing, Fairtrade has become an engine for peace, because all these resources are being able to change the way the communities participate and the way the communities invest their resources. So with that, I'll say, when you eat a banana or a coffee, think that it's not just a banana or a cup of coffee. Think that you're actually changing the lives and creating and bringing peace and prosperity to other countries. So thank you very much for supporting Fairtrade, and have a good afternoon. And if any...
We've just heard from Mr. Dario Soto Abril. Thank you very much once again. You're welcome to join the Q&A session with Dario later in the day. Za nami wystąpienie pana Dario Soto Abrila. Dziękujemy bardzo i zapraszamy na sesję pytań i odpowiedzi z jego udziałem. Przed państwem Dean Sanders, założyciel i główny inwestor Good Brand. Please welcome Mr. Dean Sanders, founder and chief investor of Good Brand.
So I'm going to use this microphone, which seems to be working. Thank you very much for that. And what a privilege and a pleasure to listen to that inspiring presentation, Dario. Quite coincidentally, Dario and I met by telephone a couple of weeks ago, and looking forward to traveling with him to his native Colombia on a project in 2 weeks' time. So really inspiring and fantastic presentation. Thank you, Dario. And it's a real pleasure for me. First of all, I'd like, before I even start, just to say thank you for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I'd like to congratulate all of the organizers of this event for quite a remarkable achievement. I believe this is the second year of the Open Eyes Economy Summit, but from what I've seen so far, it's a very exciting initiative and a very important initiative, and I'm very delighted to be part of it with you. And I particularly would like to build on many of the points that were made by Dario in his presentation, although I would also go on to say that the title of my presentation is somewhat inaccurate. I'm not looking to move from fair trade to total value creation. Rather, what I'm looking to share with you in the next minutes is how we can align the interests of organizations such as fair trade with those of the private sector, many of whom represent the kinds of clients that we at Good Brand work with and collaborate with. So it's very much about together with, and certainly not about from to. Now I just need to find the clicker. And so I also would like to just take a moment to reflect the fact that my personal and professional journey also started to a certain extent here in Poland. Some years ago, as you can probably tell from my increasingly graying hairs. But it's a real, in a sense, it's a real pleasure for me. I haven't been back to the country for about 4 years, but some 10, 12 years ago or so, I spent quite a considerable amount of time working in this country. And in fact, some of you may know this product. It's one of the outcomes of the work that we did with Danone at the time in Poland. Back in 2003, 2004, their business was struggling somewhat as a consequence of the economic recalibration and adjustment in the society. And the company was becoming increasingly less popular, being seen as being somewhat remote from the citizens of Poland, and losing business, really, losing sales, losing trust, and losing emotional proximity. And we were asked by the management at that time to put a strategy in place that could start to rebuild the relationship between the Danone business and the citizens of this country, who were increasingly patriotic and looking for local dairy producers rather than working or buying products from multinationals. And this all despite the fact that globally, Danone was enjoyed rather a strong reputation for being a socially responsible company, and even locally in Poland was giving quite some considerable charitable contributions to local organizations. So we were asked to develop a strategy that could rebuild those relationships and also help Danone to secure business growth for the coming years in Poland. At the time, we also discovered through desk research that roughly a third of children, school-age children in Poland, were technically undernourished, not receiving enough micronutrients in their daily sort of eating regime, and there were supplementary feeding programs in Polish schools at the time. So long story short, we put together a project with the Pajacyk organization of the Polska Akcja Humanitarna, NGO, with Danone, and developed a strategy around a food company getting actively involved in this topic of malnutrition. We set up, with Danone and others, a first symposium on child feeding and malnutrition issue in the country, and we followed that with some promotional activity, and then ultimately it culminated in this rather wonderful product, of which I still remain very proud all these years later, because it was the first time that Danone at that time had moved from selling liquid cold yogurts into a dehydrated product, which cut the costs significantly, and worked together with the Mother and Child Institute in Poland and with Biedronka, who I'd also like to publicly acknowledge in that project, and others, to create a low-cost product that could help to feed some of the poorest members of the society with the micronutrient, vitamin and minerals that they need on a daily basis. So from that point of view, and also from a Danone point of view, that was an interesting project because these were also citizens who were not regularly buying Danone products. So for me, I think this project back there in 2003, 2004 was formative for my own professional development and was really one of the starting points of this thinking around total value creation, where in this case, a company like Danone can innovate, create a new product, access new consumers, and provide them with a positive nutritional food that can help in the wider public crusade against the unacceptable fact, at least at that time, of malnutrition among children. So from that point of view as well, delighted to be back in Poland. So then let me turn to Fairtrade, and I'm, of course, following modestly in the footsteps of Dario in this presentation and lifting from the internet just one of many definitions, actually, that you can find about fair trade. But before that, I would also just like to congratulate you. If I understood the timeline, Dario, your organization was established 20 years ago. So congratulations on your 20th anniversary. And I say that because it's also the 20th anniversary of Goodbrand. So we have that in common. But I think that I have also to say that Fairtrade, and at that time when I set Goodbrand up, Fairtrade was one of the inspirations for me to leave my marketing career, which I'd started prior to that, and to set up a consultancy focused on total value creation and sustainable development. I'm absolutely convinced that if we want our current market-based development model to continue to succeed and flourish into the future, we need initiatives like Fairtrade to promote and to foster inclusive development. Not development just for the benefit of the North, the global North, but development that includes the global South in its frame. And I think it's important to say that and acknowledge here that Fairtrade has been one of the main pioneers and catalysts in that requirement for inclusive market-based sustainable development. But I think when you read definitions such as this, or indeed the ones that Dario shared with us, it's clear to see that essentially, first and foremost, fair trade is an economic trading tool that is fostering economic development through trade. And I think that in this case, it's trade which is based on a recalibration of the economics. And it's just amazing to see that 150 million per year being transferred to the farmers. But it's also a recalibration of power, and Dario used that terminology of empowerment, I think, very powerfully as well. But this is somewhat different to what we talk about at Goodbrand. At Goodbrand, our model or our theory of change is what we call total value creation. And this is we define it in this way, that it's the capacity of a private sector organization to create financial returns and return financial returns back to investors and shareholders or other sources of capital, but also to deliver a positive social and environmental impact. There's much discussion in our circles around the correlation of those two. I'm not a big fan of the correlation debate. I do not believe, based on my 20 years experience working in this space, that we should always look for correlations at the total corporate level. Rather, I think what I have seen many cases of, and we'll talk about one today, is correlation at the brand level, at a market level, at a specific business unit level or business issue. And in most cases, total value creation is present when you have a number of important factors in place. One of those, unsurprisingly, is leadership. Total value creation is often a requirement of a CEO who sees the long-term need to stabilize the reputation of the company or the operating continuity of the business based on issues that are coming on the radar. And I think the one that was mentioned in the previous presentation, and the most interesting and important one, is climate change. But there are also cases where that business imperative is becoming extremely close. And the example I'm going to share with you, also drawn from the coffee sector, is an illustration of just how bad things have got and how much private sector companies need to engage and step up and get involved, working in collaboration in order to address those issues. And the other thing is that companies that want to set out to create total value will need to have an ability, an organizational capability to work in what we call collaborative innovation. And in fact, the way we've been increasingly thinking about this is to frame it as an organizational competence in the area of syndicated systemic innovation. I'm sorry, that sounds a bit like a kind of slightly consultant speak and a little bit complex. So let me unpack it for you a little bit and break it down in terms of what we really mean there. I mean, the first point around innovation is nothing new to most of you in the room, I'm sure, which is that companies will need to either build new skills or leverage existing capabilities, know-how, and processes in innovation. The issue is that most times companies are doing that for relatively short-term commercial, transactional reasons. And I think what systemic innovation requires is to think beyond those normal constructs and parameters and to think about the wider systems, the wider context in which we are doing business, and indeed where we are encountering some significant challenges of either a social or an environmental nature. Systemic innovation is about identifying systems malfunctions that are already beginning to adversely impact the way in which a company can create economic value, or indeed systemic malfunctions that offer opportunities for companies to create new value by innovation and renovation of those systems. And this is essentially the area of externalities. When companies have for many years and in the past model really created economic value, often at the expense of important side effects, if you want, externalities, negative impacts from that operation, which are now coming home to roost, as it were, and are now needing urgent attention in many cases. And so syndicated systemic innovation is the need and the opportunity for commercial companies to get involved in helping to improve outcomes at a systems level. Now, the good news, because that sounds like a rather heavy burden for many CEOs and commercial who are already busy enough trying to hit their quarterly targets, the good news, I think, is inherent in the word syndication. Because the nature of this innovation and the nature of the challenges is external, it also means that we can align with the policy of public sector or the issues and requirements and missions of our civil society NGO colleagues. And so I think that syndicated systemic innovation offers us the opportunity to work much more collaboratively. And I've set out here, I think, 4 ways in which we've already seen companies doing that. In some cases, an organization may syndicate vertically. And what does that mean? It means working with all of the various different constituent parts of its own value chain or its own supply chain. So aligning, in the case that Dario was talking about, fair trade producers with intermediaries, traders, with coffee roasters, and end consumers, so that everyone is systemically shifting towards a better, more sustainable value chain. And that can actually offer a source of competitive advantage for the companies who get there first and do that early on. And in many cases, companies take the lead by inspiring and catalyzing that shift. The second one is horizontal syndication. And what I mean by that is sometimes the problems are too big for any one company alone to tackle. And climate change is another good example, although there are plenty of others. The challenge of child labor in cocoa supply chains in West Africa, the many issues around deforestation and palm oil production in Southeast Asia, and the general issues of climate change, or even other categories altogether, like the regulation of alcoholic beverage consumption. In many cases, there tends to be pre-competitive action where the industry as a whole agrees that this is just a better way of running that business or engaging in that sector or industry. The third one is polygonal, which basically is a bit of a combination of horizontal, vertical, and a few other directions as well, but it's essentially mapping out a whole series of more complex and sophisticated interrelationships that are cross-sectoral by definition and will require the engagement of public sector, civil society, and academic institutions, scientists, etc., in order to define the problem and design the solution. And the last one at the bottom, financial, is a support for all of the other 3. What we see is once you start to address these problems that are beyond your normal business, the boundaries of your own enterprise, you are in the public space, you are in the civil society space, and there you can start to access new sources of co-financing and co-funding, whether that's grant capital from the big donor agencies. In particular, a lot of money has gone into sustainable coffee production from the Dutch government and others. Or it might be attracting impact investors who see an opportunity for a long-term financial return by investing in these areas. So with all of this in mind, let me just return to fair trade and total value creation. I think with all of that, I would just say that for me, fair trade is very much a useful tool, but one of a suite of tools that can be helpful in the creation of total value. But again, I think, and it was interesting that Dario mentioned that, it needs to be aligned with the interests of the companies. And that's what we're seeing in fair trade now, is the companies are saying, of that premium that you're transferring to farmers, how is that being used? Where is it going? What's the impact? Because I need to be accountable to my consumers and my stakeholders for that impact. So let me then share a little bit what's happening and finish really with an example. And it seems that coffee has popped up a few times during the conversation. I would say that fair trade has been an absolutely critical catalyst in the improvement of outcomes, both livelihoods for farmers and also awareness of consumers. But it's not enough. It's not fundamentally changing and shifting perennial issues in the coffee sector. And those issues are very complex and multifaceted. Dario again mentioned the issue of climate change and the startling fact that by 2050, some coffee-producing regions will not be able to produce particularly the high-end quality Arabica coffees that most European consumers are enjoying and where most of the growth and also where most of the margin is, interestingly. But there are other issues. Income volatility, currency exchange rates wreak havoc with the profit and loss accounts of individual smallholder farmers, and that's even before you get into the whole issue of commodity market speculation, where much more coffee is traded notionally than is actually physically available, because it's become an interesting place for speculators to speculate on the future value of coffee. So I think we do have issues there. And the example that I wanted to share with you is the third point there, intergenerational succession. Unsurprisingly, as certain countries like Colombia and many others in the developing and transitional economies, as they develop further, young people have options. and they do not necessarily need to become coffee farmers on a small patch with all of that income volatility, all of those risks. Disease can wipe out your crop, climate change, et cetera, and many of these youngsters are just packing up and heading to the big city to work in manufacturing sector or construction sector, and there is a real issue of intergenerational succession in the coffee sector, with the average age of coffee farmers in Colombia now about 58. And one of the real issues for organizations like Nespresso is they need a consistent, high-quality supply of coffee. And these risk factors of climate change, of intergenerational succession, of income volatility are affecting the ability of companies which are growing double-digit and very fast and need that coffee. It's a long-term supply chain risk. So we worked with Nespresso and with the Fairtrade organization to build and create the first ever retirement savings scheme for smallholder coffee farmers in Colombia, aligning the interests of the farmers themselves, aligning that with the interests of the cooperatives, using that premium that Dario referred to, the 20 cents per pound of coffee, and working with the farmers to say that Nespresso would direct some of that premium into a pension savings scheme for coffee farmers, which would be matched by the farmer, and interestingly and importantly, also matched by the Colombian government. So this started as a very small pilot with about 100 coffee farmers. Within 2 years, there are now 2,000 in the pilot. Coffee farmers from other regions are asking if they can get involved. Many coffee farmers are even applying to the cooperative to see if they can, join the cooperative for the first time to participate in this program, which is a first ever retirement scheme, which will allow older farmers to retire from the hard labor of coffee farming and to be able to pass the farm on to the next generation, bringing the new ideas, the new technology, and the energy that's required for successful, profitable coffee farming. Nespresso, in their most recent Creating Shared Value report, acknowledged this as a major systemic challenge which has created for them economic value, but also for the coffee farmers themselves. And I'd like to finish, if I may. Sorry, I've overrun slightly, but if I could indulge you just to, let's take a trip to Colombia for 3 minutes and listen to the coffee farmers themselves and the cooperatives as they talk to us about this project. Sorry.
Working together between organizations like Fairtrade or the Rainforest Alliance, together with companies, together with the government, that we can tackle many of these problems. That's why you have to have these kind of partnerships to work together to see if we can find the ways forward.
Hoy tenemos 854 productores ya inscritos. A cada uno se les consignó 305.000 pesos.
Siento que es un proyecto muy bonito que nos ha tocado a todos en el corazón, y lograr que dos empresas estén vinculadas para lograr que una persona tenga una vejez digna y un retiro digno y disfrutar de esto, creo que es muy motivante para todos.
Fairtrade International nos ha traído aspectos nuevos al programa AAA, como trabajo en la dimensión social con los caficultores. Entonces, en Farmer Future hoy, que hemos visto como unos resultados, más o menos 150 caficultores, desde que lanzamos el programa Farmer Future, han entrado a ser miembros de las cooperativas.
Es bastante importante este beneficio y el apoyo en Expreso y de la cooperativa, en fin. Eso nos da tranquilidad para poder seguir con la producción del café.
Hacia futuro el impacto va a ser muy fuerte. Yo diría que va a motivar a que los jóvenes y más personas permanezcan en el campo y se dediquen a la caficultura.
hacen en el otro departamento, en Caldas, y ahí sería como un llamado a Nespresso y al gobierno, pues, y al municipio, que pudiéramos trabajar en este sentido y esta prima, pues, la pudiéramos empoderar en ese sentido, pues, a beneficio de los agricultores de esta zona.
Viene a ser ya también una esperanza para nosotros para podernos jubilar, para cuando lleguemos a la edad de jubilarnos ya podamos salir tranquilos a disfrutar nuestra vejez tranquilamente.
Just to say thank you to Nespresso and to the Fairtrade organization for working together in that project and program. I hope to see some of you in the discussion that we have at 10 to 4 later at the Q Hotel. And thank you very much for your attention and wishing you all a successful conference. Thank you.